Okay, so in the previous couple of videos, over the course of the last couple of videos, I've been discussing the topologies, the difference, the physical and logical topologies that we'll be using in these 6 labs for the last 3 chapters of CCNA3. I mentioned that one way to save yourself a whole bunch of time is actually to have a lot of the pre-configuration done before you start in on the meat of the lab. There's a couple things to notice here. One, and now you should, um, the first part of every lab, other than once you get past the cabling, which may be unique for each lab, though in this case, in these 6 labs, it's not as unique as it would look from the outside. Um, Look at the next section and you'll notice that for all intents and purposes, they are significantly the same. So you do your part 1, build the network and configure basic device settings. These Cisco labs all have basically the same laundry list of things to do, with the exception of step G, where you do all the addressing. You disable DNS lookup, you name the device, you set the enable password, you set the console and VTY passwords, you set up a message of the day, you do logging synchronous, you set the clock rate, etc., etc., etc. So, what you really should do is have a basic config, not simply for just R1 that you can copy to R2 and R3. The really quick way to do this is to have 3 basic configs and to just kind of modify them for every lab. This is actually something I've done for myself. So what you'll need, particularly, and the fun thing about this is once you do this work, if you put it on one flash drive, or really, say, several flash drives. I've got a flash drive in this little pocket and a flash drive in this little pocket, and it's my badge from the school. Y'all sometimes have seen me wearing it around my neck. Um, what you can do once you get it all right is take the package of configs that you've built for the whole lab, not just the beginning, but all of it, particularly if you're trying to work on this, get some of the work done even if you're not with the equipment. Do it all, put it in named files, and go from there. So let me plug this in back here and show you what this looks like. And it notices. Let's see. So let me go find my... Bam. Okay. It says there's a problem, but that's not really true. Fedora Live 24. This is a bootable disk running a bootable USB running what is now sort of a legacy, slightly antiquated version of Fedora. Fedora is now up to version 31. So what I could do if I really wanted to copy this stuff and throw it away and bring it back again, I could bring this all the way up to Fedora 31. I might do that later. I'm not going to do that right now. So let's go into CCNA3 configs. I have a base configs directory. So I got router 1, router 2, router 3. Now, a lesson that I learned in CCNA4, and let me show you the CCNA4 directory for just a minute. Eventually it clicked to me that, hey, why am I just doing the routers? Particularly with scaling networks and even connecting networks, connecting networks and scaling networks. Sometimes you're doing fun things with the routers and fun things with the switches. Now, you don't necessarily need all 6 devices every single time, but it's a really good idea to have all of it ready to go. And if you don't need something, you just delete it from that lab's configuration. So let me go back to 3. So I've got my R1 scaling network space. Actually, no, don't do that. The silly thing wanted to load this in Notepad, in plain old Notepad. A better way to do this, frankly, is with Notepad++, which, let me go get that. I'm going to open. Notepad, the virtue of Notepad++ is that it's got these tabs. So I can pop back and forth. Open, boom. I can pop back and forth between the various configs, make changes, name them. Now, and if, for example, you accidentally put the interface config for router 1 on router 3, you can just kind of move it over. So I've got enable config, enable and T. Now, what I do here, because I've got my enable config, enable, then configure terminal, my host name, IP domain lookup. Now, I begin each of these blocks with enable and config T to make absolutely certain that I go into enable and global config mode before I start throwing configs in. The last thing I do is copy run start. Remember, Cisco iOS can take some fairly truncated, abbreviated commands and interpret and complete them for you. Now, the next thing you would want to do is the rest of it by section. Now, what I suggest you do is don't just do the whole thing at once. Work a section at a time, drop it in, troubleshoot that, go on, go on, go on. So let me show you. Actually, I think I've got an example of 8336 in here. So I've got my initial configurations for all three of these, and I'm going to open them with Notepad. So I've got my router 1 initial config. So I did all of that. And technically speaking, I would need to do an enable there. Now, what I did here essentially was build 336 right on top of 8245, which is why I'm doing my IPv4 and my IPv6 interface configurations all at the same time. So before I go too far ahead of myself, so let me go into my console, my command line, enter. Now, the reason I do this, and actually this doesn't need to be an end. Now, if you do end, it will kick you all the way back to user exec mode, which is of limited usefulness, honestly. Enable. Now, you can't hurt yourself having an enable where one doesn't need to be, or a config T where one doesn't need to be. It'll just kind of ignore it. So what I can do is copy all of this. Oh, and okay, I don't want to do that either. Enable. Now, the reason I've got this in sections right here is that what if I wanted to copy run start after every section? I could if I wanted to. As it is, I only have this one right here. So let me to do that. Actually, let me try the whole kit and caboodle. Copy. Now, one thing to note. If you are going to copy an encrypted password, you have to be careful. You either have to include something in the command syntax of the encryption that indicates that it is already encrypted, or you have to turn it back into plain text. So don't just think you can copy your running configs into a text file and then drop them back as is. You might get things that don't make sense. The other thing to note here is that on these interfaces, you're going to need to be a little sneakier than usual. Now, for example, you give the interface its IP address, but particularly if you've copied out of a running config, the running config doesn't include the no shutdown command. So you have to include that if you want those interfaces to come up. So let me do this. Copy, paste, boom. Okay. And okay. Okay, so I've got my running config. I can more or less now do the same thing with routers 2 and 3. So let me do that right quick, and then I will show you what the rest of this looks like. Okay, so I've got 3 configs dropped in and saved. And I've got the basics of, I can start on the interface configuration now. I'll actually do that in the next video.